مساء الخير جميعا، أهلا وسهلا فيكم. بما أنه اللقاء اليوم بالإنجليزي، اسمحوا لي أني أقدم الندوة وضيفنا اليوم بالإنجليزي. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. We're excited to have this discussion where we'll be taking a closer look at the exhibition at كانون until this Elegy ends. Joining us is the artist behind the exhibition, Joe Namy. This exhibition will be on until about mid-April. So for those of you in Amman who haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend coming to experience it for yourselves. This exhibition is also part of Kanoon's wider programming since October 2023, which has centered around Palestine and Lebanon in light of the genocide that we've witnessed unfold in Gaza since October 2023 and the tragic war in Lebanon that took place late last year. We're fortunate to have Joe Namy with us tonight. Joe is a Lebanese artist based between London and Beirut, whose work focuses on sound, its history, its social impact, and its relationship to the built environment. Through his collaborative public sculptures and performances, Joe explores how sound is socially constructed and shaped by political forces. I'm sure Joe will give us a better introduction to his own practice, but in this conversation, Joe and I will dive into the exhibition, the themes it addresses, its relation to everything going on around us in the process of bringing it to life. The way we're going to do this is really by walking through the exhibition and reflecting on specific pieces and the processes behind the work. Our discussion will last about an hour, and then we'll open the floor to any questions and the wider conversation with all of you. So Joe, thank you so much for joining us tonight. There's a lot to explore, so if you're ready, we can kind of drive straight in.
Thank you, Khaled, and thank you to the Fnaan team for hosting this event and the exhibition, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. Yes, looking forward to getting into it with you all.
Badr is going to be with us, so I'm going to every once in a while ask Badr to switch some slides. So Badr, please go for it. Joe, I think I want to start really with you, kind of giving just some context to your practice. I want to maybe ask it in this way. Are there specific anchors that you think define your practice? Are there certain questions that you find yourself asking over and over again through your work?
Yeah, a lot of my work is based around, it's very collaborative. A lot of it is based in sound and looking at the politics of sound and music and how that affects society in different ways. Sound is a source of power. And then a lot of it is also, I don't know, I have different strands of research that I've kind of are ongoing. Oftentimes, might research a topic for years, 10 years. Like for instance, in the slideshow, the one with the cars, that's a performance called Automobile that's been ongoing since 2011. I've done different iterations of it in different cities across the world, looking at sound system cultures, cars with like really big sound systems, and looking at how those are used and how they're heard across the world in different situations and settings. Other fields of interest could be the history of opera in the region. That's the Big Curtain, a piece called Libretto, looking at the history and resonance of opera houses in the region, their relationship to power, their relationship to protest, their relationship to music and how they've influenced music in the region as well. And then the third image that we see here is the one with the row of speakers. It's a piece called Cosmic Breath. That piece looks at the Adhan, but comes out of kind of broader research around spirituality and sound systems and how they're connected. But all of these are kind of like research threads that are just ongoing, and often I'll find different iterations. I'm using exhibitions as a way to explore different iterations of the research that I've undertaken.
I'm wondering, I mean, there definitely seems to be kind of a focus around sound and its relationship to everything, around us. And I'm just wondering, kind of, is there a particular moment in your career that kind of, helped you kind of shift or kind of focus on these themes in particular? Was there a defining moment where you were like, okay, this is really kind of what I think my practice is about? Of course, kind of notwithstanding that there's a process in which everything changes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say one, I'm still figuring it out. I don't think I've figured it out yet, but one important moment definitely was taking part in the Mishkal Alwan homework space program in 2011. It was the first year of that program. Up until then, I was really just didn't know what I was doing with my practice and how I wanted to work as an artist. And that program really helped me focus and expose me to kind of ideas that I hadn't been exposed to before, that really made me realize, okay, you can use music in this way in art. You can use sound in this way through art practice. I'd always been doing music and I've always been doing art, but before then, they were two completely separate things. So it wasn't really until that program that I was like, oh, actually, you can combine both of them in different ways. And you can use a gallery to explore ideas that you can't explore through a performance or through, a traditional music venue or something like this. And that really, yeah, it just opened up this whole world for me. But I've been still trying to figure out my place in, but yeah, it's been a ride for sure.
So your initial engagement with Dar al-Fanoon began in the Summer Academy in July 2023. Since then, much has unfolded. The exhibition was originally planned. So your exhibition was originally planned to be open in kind of later that year, or kind of March in the following year. But then, since then, the war in Gaza started, and then Lebanon, and this really kind of all altered the reality in which we were kind of working in. So, I want to take you back first to that initial engagement with Dar al-Fanoon in the Summer Academy, and if you can tell us a bit about what that entailed, but also maybe kind of walk us through how this shift in everything, starting October, maybe kind of influenced the development of this exhibition and the realities that came, alive now.
Yeah, that was like another lifetime ago, right? Like it seems like so long ago. So much has changed since last summer of 23. But yes, so that was my first time coming to Dar al-Fanoon. And did a workshop with it was a 2-week kind of intensive workshop in the Summer Academy with Khayyam Alim, Khayyam and who was the first participant? Yeah, Khayyam and who else? There was someone before Khayyam, Ziada, yes. And it was a great experience for me. My first kind of initiation to Dar al-Fanoon, which I've heard so much about, but hadn't had the chance to visit before. It's such an iconic space, and to be able to spend a bit of time there, a bit of time with local artists, and what we focused on was looking at a part of it was looking at spatial sound, like surround sound and quadraphonic sound. We're thinking about spatial sound installations, but we're also looking at it through the lens of Halim al-Dabah, the Egyptian composer, who we'll talk a little bit more about later on as well. But thinking about a lot of his ideas around sound, sonification, sound in relation to nature, sound in relation to the city, the physicality of sound itself, and how sound moves us, the kind of psychoacoustics of listening, things like this. That was kind of accentuated by a performance we did in the courtyard that was a quadraphonic live mix that I put together for the workshop, which was an epic setting to be able to have a performance and be able to just perform with for the audience in the courtyard, like at sunset. It was really magical. But again, that seems like a lifetime ago, like a different life. Even though it was just like a year and a half ago. Crazy.
Well, I think just kind of for the context of the audience, the initial exhibition I think was supposed to take place in March 2024, but of course
it was going to be in October,
October 2023, and then the
end of October, And then we ended up doing another workshop the end of that because we weren't sure what was going to happen. I remember speaking with Ahmed. It's like, well, we don't know how long this is going to last. We didn't know the extent of how it would play out at the beginning of October, right at the very beginning of the war. And so like, well, let's just come, because I was scheduled to come the end of October anyways, to do a workshop and to start setting up for the exhibition. And it just kept getting worse and worse. So we kept the workshop, but decided to postpone the exhibition just because of the situation.
We do want to get into kind of individual works because I think it's kind of the particular of each work. I think where the themes of this kind of exhibition really come to life. But the title I remember was really there was a lot of back and forth. What is the title? And in the end, kind of the decision was until this elegy ends, and in Arabic, حتى ينتهي هذا الرثاء. Looking back at the title now and the collection of works, what do you make of it? How do you think it speaks to, I think, maybe the comprehensive themes which kind of we're dealing with in this exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the titles are always hard for me. It's always kind of like the most difficult things because you put a lot of importance on it, right? Like it's what people associate with the show. It's the kind of first introduction that people have. And we were going back and forth. We were finished with all the works. We knew all the works that were going to be in it, and we knew kind of like the feel of the show, but we didn't have a title that encompassed that. And it was actually Ahmed who came up with, who suggested until this elegy ends. It relates to, I don't know, I still love it. I still feel like it's very emotionally connected to the show and provides a good kind of, just like a teaser of what the show is about, a taste of what the show is about. And I knew we didn't want something that was defeatist. We wanted to address the situation that was happening, the tragedy, the weight, the sadness, and the difficulty that we were all going through. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be defeatist. I didn't want it to be, just kind of like it really kind of twisting the tragedy aspect of it. I wanted something that was a little bit more hopeful but also sensitive to the issues that we were trying to address through the show. And I feel like this title does that. And it speaks to how music is used within mourning, how it's used as a healing process to help us get over the sadness, as elegies do. And it speaks to the kind of ongoing, this ongoing sadness or this ongoing elegy that's been been going. It didn't start in October. We all know that. And it's not going to end now with the ceasefire. It's, you know, something we're going to still continue. We're still dealing with, and still, and we're going to be dealing with it, you know, for a while. And so I like that aspect of it. So I thought
there's a composite kind of aspect to it, in the sense that, yeah, it's you know, until this elegy ends, in you know, the hope that it kind of, you know, the idea that it ends, but until this elegy ends, that we kind of keep on continuing, in you know, in trying to, you know, to continue, essentially.
Yes, definitely.
So when you first enter the exhibition, this is the work that we see. It's called Family Trees, and what it's essentially showing is, against kind of light boxes, these kind of individual trees which you see here, olive trees from the village of Dermimas, which is your hometown, and kind of it's each distinct tree being photographed against this light box, which you know, on kind of that left side you're seeing them in spring, and on the right side you're seeing them in fall, so against two seasons. But these were also trees that in the most recent war, you tell us, are being targeted by white phosphorus Israeli airstrikes. And so kind of, you know, one thing that, you know, I'd love to hear more from you about how this kind of, where this work came from, but also, so you do mention to us that these were trees you were photographing between 2014 and 2020, 2022. And sorry, they were being targeted in the most recent attack on Lebanon in 2024. You know, when you were photographing these trees, when you were documenting them, you know, did you, you know, was this kind of something you were doing, apprehending what was going to come, or you know, because, you know, the fact that you have this repository of images and these were the same trees being targeted in 2024, I just kind of, you know, how that comes together in a sense.
Yeah. So it started out really just as I didn't know what I was doing with the photographs, to be honest, when I first started. I would just go out on these kind of nature walks in the orchards, and just take pictures of trees. Trees that kind of attracted me, either through their pose, through the bark, or the unique, each one has quite a unique look and kind of a unique pose. And so I would just kind of photograph ones that drew my attention, ones that I was kind of drawn to. And it would just became a practice, something that I would do that would help calm me, or would help me think, help me reflect, just be closer to nature, be closer to these wonderful, really beautiful organic things. But at the same time, I knew that there is a fragility and a history that these trees hold with them as well. They were first targeted, they were targeted in 2006, in the 2006 war as well, both through white phosphorus, but also with cluster bombs that were thrown the last 3 days of the war. They were just throwing millions of cluster bombs, expired cluster bombs that essentially acted like landmines once they landed and didn't explode in 2006. And it took almost 10 years for them to clean up that tragedy from the trees. And so that's kind of like, once that cleanup process started is when I started taking the trees. So maybe it was an unconscious thing to want to document these, document this setting, document these poses, these trees. But mainly, I think it was more of a cathartic thing for me to be able to go through and just be able to, spend time with these trees and spend time in nature in that way. But then once the war started and they started getting targeted, specifically targeted, so along with the genocide there was the ecocide as well that was happening. And immediately found myself coming back to these photos and just being overwhelmed by the tragedy and by the senselessness of it all. And that was the first time I decided that, okay, actually, I think it's important to show these, to show them as, because the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. These are living beings, and just by their presence is an act of resistance. It is an act of, you know, they've some of them are 2,000 years old. They've experienced and witnessed so much, and have given so much, and are an important part of our culture, an important part of, you know, my family, and our village. Our village is quite well known for its olive oil. The trees that you see here are specifics. Most of them are a specific strain of tree called suri, which is not that common. It's a very old kind of type of tree that you don't find so often because it doesn't yield very high. It doesn't have a very high yield. The olives and the oil that it produces has a very unique taste, but doesn't produce a lot of it, so it's not used that common. It's gone kind of, most people don't use it because it doesn't produce a lot of oil, but it is very tasty. It is very, very special, and so it was important to kind of think about, just kind of like the history and what these trees represented for us, and why were they being targeted? You know, what was the point of Israel targeting, you know, doing the ecocide? What were they trying to accomplish? Why were they trying to accomplish it? And I felt like this presentation, or this particular arrangement of photographs, kind of addresses a lot of these issues that I was thinking about in responding to the genocide and the ecocide that was happening.
Maybe I know that you were kind of asking that last question rhetorically, but you know, just kind of, if you can kind of speak a bit more about that relationship between, I think, kind of their memas and those trees, but also what do you think they were really trying to accomplish? I think, because this was, you know, kind of quite clearly deliberate targeting, if I'm not mistaken. If you're saying it's over centuries, from 2006 to 2024. And I think to kind of attack with white phosphorus, it becomes even, I think you're also essentially making soil inhospitable.
Yeah, definitely. It's an ongoing, I mean, it's nothing new. They have a well-known documented policy called the scorched earth policy, which directly looks at different ways of poisoning the land so that it makes it uninhabitable. And it wasn't just with white phosphorus. They were also using bombs, they're using bullets, they're using fire, they're using actual poisonous chemicals. There's been numerous and well-documented attempts by the IDF of trying to poison the land as much as they can. And like our village is less than 3 kilometers from the border. It's very, very close to the border. Like before 48, you know, it was much more of a mix, you know. Like my family had land that was taken after 48. There was not really a separation between the two. But so much, even until today, I mean, they're still trying to create a kind of buffer zone from the border just to remove people from this area. It's been horrible, and it's been well documented. And if you just look up scorched earth policy, you can read more about the types of tactics and how they've been deliberately targeting the land itself.
But I remember in the early calls when we were discussing what to put in this room in particular, because it is a challenging room, that one. I think there is a presence there, and I think we were also getting close to this period where we need to make a decision, and you showed up 2 days later with this really kind of moving idea of projecting those kind of the trees onto the stained glass windows. And I think the idea was really, really moving, that we never really asked you how this idea came about, or how this process kind of came to be. I'm wondering if you do have any impressions on that.
Yeah, this was the hardest, probably the hardest room to think about what to do with, and how to address it, how to treat it. We had originally planned for something very different, like a curtain piece we were going to put there. It didn't really work that well in relation to the other works, and it really wasn't until, I don't exactly know how it clicked. I knew, like, from the light boxes, one of the early tests I did was just printing the photos on light sensitive paper and then putting them on my window. And I really liked the effect that it gave. And that helped me kind of figure out how to do the light box and what images to choose for the light box. And then there was another show that I did. So the first time I showed the light box images, the trees, was for a show at the Brooklyn Public Library. And they had we did these two kind of light boxes that were converted display cases that we turned into light boxes. And I was invited to another show at a friend's small gallery called Tunzik. And for that one, I just took one of their windows and did a kind of adaptation of the light box there. What I really liked was how you could see there was a tree right behind it, and you could see the tree kind of moving on the wind through the photographs. And I liked that kind of relationship between, like, the indoors and the outdoors, and the actual live tree with the image of the tree. And so I thought, like, okay, let's just see how it works if I was to mock up some photos on the window panes for this space, for this room. And it just clicked. I mean, it really tied everything together for me. The way that the images interact with the city, interact with the architecture, interact with the light, it really brings out a lot of what I wanted to address and what I wanted these trees to represent. The trees as pillars, literally becoming pillars, which was just like a happy accident that worked out. The way that the city kind of sits on top of some of the trunks, and some of the lower images, the way that some of the branches and trees fill out the actual trees fill out the imagery as well. But then there's alternating panels, so one with an image on it, one with not an image on it. And it allows you to kind of really make that connection between how we, in general, take these trees with us, even if we're not in the orchard. This is where we come from, and this is what stays with us all this time. So I thought it really kind of, made that connection in a very poetic and aesthetic way.
I'm not sure actually if there's anything kind of that needs a lot of explanation here, but I think when we are in that room, there is something I think really interesting, because you are seeing almost 4 different representations of a tree, or on the left you have that the photograph of someone, a photo taken by someone in their mass of a tree being burned during kind of earth strike. In your kind of the front, you see that tree kind of being projected on the city, and then on your right you see a glimpse of a live tree, which we'll get into in a second. And then kind of when you're looking back, you see all those kind of trees in their mass, I think. And I don't know, I mean, does this kind of, I know that a lot of this kind of evolved almost in as that process was evolving, but is there anything that do you see any new connections you haven't seen before, or I mean, you can also choose to not respond to that question, I think.
I mean, absolutely. Each time I visit this space, I see something I didn't see before. I mean, there's things you can kind of plan, and then there's things that you can only realize when you're in the space and when you're there. And like placing the live olive tree in the doorway, that was important to make that connection between the two. Placing the photo of the tree burning with white phosphorus, in juxtaposition of the live tree, and then in the midst of the light coming through the light boxes as well. Yeah, these are decisions that were very difficult to make. It was a kind of stressful, and not stressful installation, but for this room particularly, it was really sensitive and very delicate of what elements we could introduce into this space that wouldn't distract or take away from the intent. And I'm really, I think it works with what we have right now. I think that there's a definite delicate balance that we've been able to kind of strike between all the different types of the iconography and the types of representation and imagery that we're using. And I don't know.
I do remember actually that there was kind of a bit of a back and forth on the conversation on the tree shown on the curtain there, because I remember when it first came up, we were all taken kind of aback a bit in the sense that it is quite graphic, quite heavy. But I think it's as we kind of continued forward, I think we started to realize that the reason why I think we see that is because of how tied it is to, I think, the wider life of the people who live around, I think, this tree in the sense. I mean, it's not to detract from the value of the tree itself, but I think at some point, I think being close to the material, you start to realize that this is a signifier for something that is much wider than to do, I think, to people, or at least that was my take on how that conversation kind of panned out.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I read it too. I mean, it's open to interpretation, of course, but it's a really heavy image, the most violent image we have in the show also. But I felt it was necessary because of what we were discussing, and yeah, I wanted to really just make that apparent, and bring that into consciousness. Yeah, it is a necessary picture, and I'm glad that we included it.
So here we're, just for the audience, kind of breaking a bit with the chronological order. We're skipping a piece in terms of spatial kind of linearity, but I know that kind of Halim Al-Bashir feeds into it quite a lot of the other works. So kind of here we're entering into a room where Joe's kind of laid out a table, and in that table is a lot of his ongoing archival, research onto or concerning kind of the life of Halim Al-Bashir, who has really kind of been, I think, a long-term interest, I think, in Joe, for you, Joe, and kind of had a huge influence on your practice. Can you kind of tell us a bit more about who Halim Al-Bashir is and what sparked your interest in the first place?
Yeah. So Halim was a composer, ethnomusicologist, educator, musician, just magical human being, who had a crazy and long and very eclectic career. I think he passed away in 2017, and was, I think, at the age of 95, maybe 95. And just had an epic career, basically. composing music for the pyramids, for the sound and light show at the pyramids. He was the first, what is credited as one of the first people who have invented electronic music in 1944. He created his first piece of electronic music. And he has kind of has a very particular approach to sound. He's also done some of the earliest field recordings in Africa, and also in throughout South America, as well as different parts of the US. And yeah, just has done so much, and has a very particular way of thinking about sound. And has been someone whose practice has been very important for my own practice. He's been a big source of inspiration. I got the chance to know him personally, interviewed him a few times. We worked on a project together. And since his passing, I've been able to kind of dig a bit more into his research, into his archive as well, researching his archive. I've gone a few times to visit his archive. What was his house? He taught in Kent State University in Ohio for, I think, like 40 years, or more than 40 years. And for a long time, that's where his archive was held, and it's now in Northwestern University in Chicago. But I had the chance to visit it before they moved it last year. And it's just an incredible archive, because you're also looking at the history of recorded sound. You're looking at kind of early experiments in electronic music. He also wrote symphonic music. He also wrote tons of scores for derveke and hand drums. And so, yeah, I was just able to kind of dig into all that. And yeah, so for this show, I wanted to kind of, one, introduce an audience to his practice, because he's not that well known, unfortunately. And so there's a big mix of different, there's like scores, writings, notebooks, and different notes that he's been taking, as well as photographs and drawings that are all kind of arranged around one particular score that he wrote in 1949 called "It Is Dark and Damp on the Front." And this piece...
Sorry, go back one slide so I can just, I think it's helpful to have that kind of a complement. So it's the piece.
That score in the middle, yeah. So you can listen to, there's headphones. If you see in the picture, there's headphones on the table. It's just like a study table. It's where you can kind of put the headphones on, listen to the sound, the musical composition. The piece that he wrote for piano that was written after the Nakba, and was written about the Nakba. And the way that it used different chords and modulations, and explores the piano in totality. So like actually pounding the strings, or it's a very physical score of how, asking for the pianist to kind of really embody what he had written. And so you can kind of read through it, look at the score, but then also look through a lot of the other materials as well, the supplemental materials that we've included, that are in some way related, in some ways, all somewhat related to that particular piece. And that piece was important for him, one, because of the subject matter. It's a very heavy subject. It's very, talking about the tragedy of the Nakba. It was a very emotional piece. But it also was just really well received. It struck a chord with people when he first performed it in Cairo. And that piece eventually led him to get a scholarship to go study in the States with Aaron Copland, who's a very well-known composer, American composer, and all these other musicians. And that just kind of opened the door to all these other opportunities for him. So this piece was really pivotal for his own practice as a musician and artist as well. And so like some of the things that you see around him are like drawings that he did And for him, sound was a very physical thing. He had synesthesia, so he would associate certain sounds with certain colors, and he would do these kind of graphic scores where he would draw out with colors and lines and scribbles, and he would interpret those through music. And he had his own kind of system for doing that. And he had his own very particular approach to, like, for instance, electronic music, where all his electronic music, I guess his rule was that it had to come from within. It had to start with the human voice and then be affected and manipulated electronically. But it was important for him that it starts from within the body and then goes out to the synthesizer and becomes effective.
That's actually interesting. Why so?
Why it starts with the voice?
Yeah, I mean, why that stance in a sense?
I think that's just his approach to electronic music. Because he also studied agricultural engineer. That's what he studied with. That's what he graduated with. And some of his earliest job was to go just along the Nile and help farmers with their crops, and you would explore, like, using sound as a natural pesticide. So, like, creating trinkets that would, like, distract beetles or birds or different types of bugs just using sound. So sound was a very physical thing for him. And he was also struck by lightning as well. And one of the things he talks about is how the sound that came out of him when he was struck by lightning, I think that had a big impact as well. Like his scream, he's like, I remember my scream most night because it didn't sound like it was coming from me. It was like the sound that came from somewhere else that was channeled through my body. And then, like, for instance, the first piece of electronic music he did was a kind of dubbed out, really remixed Czar ritual. Czar is all about using song, music, and voice to heal people, and so he understood the power that a voice can have, and I think that's what he was trying to continually reach for through his compositions, was just really extracting the power of the human voice.
I mean, there's so much I would love to press you on this, and I think we need to move on just for the sake of it. But I think across, for I think from everything you're saying, and I think what definitely I think started to strike me when you were explaining this table to me the first time is that there is this really this relationship with almost translating sound, either from events to futurities, to kind of how sound carries forward in a sense, I think. And that's definitely, I think, something that I feel like, I think maybe we can talk about this in a bit of the later works, but this piece is called The Siren Sung 6 Different Ways. It is born out of a collaboration between you and a British Iraqi singer called Aya Sultani. And essentially, I think maybe we can just play the sound first, and then we can talk about it a bit more.
we can stop it there.
I mean, I think that there's multiple layers to this piece, but maybe first of all, I'd kind of just, can you tell us about how this collaboration with Aya Sultani came about, and then maybe I know that this siren kind of maybe as a concept was developed in kind of different circumstances, but when it came, I think, to this exhibition, given I think the circumstances surrounding that kind of took on a new connotation and meaning, and I would like to know kind of just how you feel that developed in a sense.
Yeah, so I've been collaborating with Alia since 2000, I want to say 16 or 17, a long time. She's amazing vocalist, dramatic soprano, works with experimental opera, and just has an amazing voice, and is really open to trying new things and trying to really push her voice as much as she can. I always love working with her, and try and work with her as much as I can, just because it's she's amazing. And this particular piece, I think we first started recording ideas around it in 2018. It goes back a while, and I was interested in siren songs, different ways in which sirens can affect us. One as a cause for alarm, but also siren is like a lullaby. Siren is like as a warning. Siren as an alert. There's different kind of roles that a siren can play. And I was trying to explore that through this particular piece. And so it's like 6 different interpretations of a siren, some sung very softly, some with more urgency and more anger. And it was really just trying to push how far we could go with, just trying to address the siren as a song, or trying to transpose the siren into a song. And so it's a piece that has stayed with me for a long time. And I like to think that it just kind of thinks about and talks about kind of the urgency of what we're kind of dealing with today, in a very abstracted way, in a sense. But through the abstraction allows certain contexts to come into play, and certain whatever conditions that we're experiencing to come into play as well. And so for this presentation of the sound piece, we are hearing it through a clay speaker, a large clay speaker. It's about 50 centimeters in diameter. And the idea is like it's a speaker. I wanted to think about the fragility of the siren itself. One as for who does the siren call? Who is the siren warning towards? Who is the siren warning? And who doesn't hear the siren as well? It became very apparent early on during the genocide, is like you'd have these, there was no siren in Gaza for people who were being rained down bombs, or in South Lebanon, or in Lebanon, but at the same time, you'd have sirens were such a big thing when missiles were coming into Israel, and so like who is the siren calling in this situation? And that's one of the things that I wanted to try to address through this particular piece.
Thank you for that explanation. Whether if we can move to the next slide. This is the last piece in the exhibition. So this is what the visitor is faced with as they're leaving. So this is a piece that was done in collaboration with musicians from the Edward Said National Conservatory of Music, It has contributions by Mina Ayad, Antonio Shakar, Diane Salman, and Ayham Hilal and Sam Hawari. And also it was with the support of Muhammad Maraga and Sam Bustani. And I think what you did in this piece was you asked each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 musicians to send a piece that for them holds a memory of the land. They sent you pieces from, taqasim and improvisations, I think, to things that were actually surprisingly quite popular and well known, and not necessarily actually related to. I mean, we're coming in from the wider Levant and even Kulthum's Rubaiyat al-Khayyam, which I think was kind of interesting, and we kind of discussed that in a bit. But maybe before I do, we're going to hear one of the pieces that were in response and just kind of see the installation itself. So whether you can go for it if you'd like. I mean, I'd love to hear from you a bit about how this piece came to be, but there's kind of a specific point which I think is quite interesting, because we mentioned in this, or you mentioned in this piece that sound in a sense is a testimony to this relationship in land, and I can definitely see that. I think there is something that when we listen to particular tunes, to particular melodies, kind of you definitely kind of see that relationship, you feel it. I'm not sure if I can always kind of scientifically or academically or even rationally put my finger on it, and I don't know if that's necessary, but where does that come from?
Yeah, well, I don't know where it comes from. But part of this project, this particular installation, definitely comes out of Halim's thinking about the relationship between agriculture and culture. And this particular installation, it's 5 musicians and 5 trees. But they're not just any trees, they're fruit-bearing trees, very, very particular trees. It was important that they were fruit-bearing trees. And these are trees that give us something, as we take care of them, they will take care of us as well. And so the idea is to think of duets with trees. Then each speaker and each musician comes from one speaker and is playing to one particular tree. So the idea is kind of thinking about that one-to-one connection, that one-to-one relationship. It echoes the one-to-one relationship I had with the photographs, of photographing each individual olive tree. And then it's also thinking about, like historically, there's so many songs that we can draw upon that are related to agriculture, that come out of our relationship to nature, both as not just the songs, but also the instruments themselves. The organic instruments, come from different types of trees. The drum frames come from different types of trees. The wood for the oud, or the wood for the violin, comes from very different particular types of trees. And so the sound gets transformed in many different ways, or has an evolution that comes out of nature in so many different ways. But I think in this particular setting, when you experience it after seeing the photographs of the trees, after seeing the window light box, it has a different connotation. It brings about a different connotation for sure. And that was something I definitely deliberately wanted to impose on the viewer, because these aren't just musicians; these are musicians from the Edward Said National Conservatoire. It was important that we worked with that organization to amplify those voices, and also it's very difficult for musicians, especially during this time, to be able to produce, to continue working, to continue to express themselves through their music. I was really grateful that we had the opportunity to, just be able to work with them and create something really, really amazing and really beautiful together. And I think it comes through in the installation and how they're paired together. But also in the room itself is very light and bright. Thinking about the architecture of the space and how we're experiencing the music and the trees in this room with these kind of like historical tiles, and I just think they all work together in a really interesting way.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something I think really about kind of the way that you played it out, and I think in a sense there's something very experiential, and I always feel that sometimes when I'm supposed to give tours to people, when I enter this room, I really do feel it's quite self-explanatory. But I think this is a good time to open the Q&A, I think, to open it up. But I know Badr needs a bit of time to do that. I mean, just kind of anecdotally, I think that there's one person, and I can't remember who this person was, but if they are here, please do let us know who came into that particular room and mentioned to me, "Oh, that's the tree that sings." Like I thought they actually, they were expecting a singing tree. Apparently, that's how the information was relayed to them. Then that's another, I think, translation for you over there.
Yeah, I love that. Singing trees.
So we've opened up the Q&A. So anyone who kind of has any questions, you can either raise your hand or ask through the chat. I think maybe kind of, as that happens, Joe, I know this is a really, really kind of difficult question to answer, but you, I think across this different work, you are really kind of almost relaying to us, I think, different, kind of moments and events from the land and everything that's going on and circumstances. And continuity is certainly something that you are kind of constantly talking about. And I, short from kind of asking you that cliche question, but really, do you in your own stance, I think, as an artist, have a particular stance about what works like this can offer in the wider scheme of things? And really, kind of the honest answer is it something, is it just a medium of thinking? Is it a medium of documentation? Or
yeah, I mean, I do think artists are documentarians of the times that they live in. I think that is one job that we have, both emotional documentarians, but also I think a good art piece can kind of capture the mood or and capture kind of like the vibe of what we're kind of going through at this particular moment. A good artwork can do that. And I think that's always kind of like what I'm trying to, that's all I can really try and hope for within artwork. It's a difficult question, especially like thinking about, I mean, now that, we're in a ceasefire right now, we have a little bit of time to pause and reflect, but when you're in the middle of it, all you can do is react. And oftentimes that reactive impulse becomes, I don't know, it's just, it's the only way I know how to react, I guess. And so I don't think it's, yeah, I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult. It's a difficult question. But I do think that there's definitely, it's important to act as a documentarian. But that's also why I work collaboratively as well, because I enjoy the process of thinking through certain ideas with other people as well, seeing how they can also amplify this idea, change it, reflect it. I really enjoy that process as well. And so that's really important for my practice and for the works that we see here.
So we have a question here from Ayat Tawfiq, who asks, what will you consider the real end of this elegy? If the question needs any kind of further clarification, or if you have an interpretation, you can kind of definitely ask Ayat.
I mean, I don't know if there will ever be an end. Even if there is a free Palestine, there is the, you know, the tragedies that we're still carrying with us, and we can never, you know, never release in a sense. I don't think an elegy really ends. I think there's new songs that come into play that help ease us out of it. But I really don't think that there is ever really an end to an elegy, to be honest.
We have another question here from an anonymous attendee. Says, I have a question about the relation between silence and sound. You are a sound artist. The description of the exhibit talks about silence. How do you listen to silence? Can you do that? How has your work with sound shaped your relationship to silence and silencing? So actually, just kind of to root that, because I was just checking where exactly. So where it talks about silence is that, you know, the resilient, we kind of in the exhibition it's saying the works offer a space to listen to what endures, echoing the persistence of life across generation landscapes. You know, echoing the resilience of communities, the lifeways rooted in trees and soil, and the stories that resist erasure despite violent attempts to silence them. So I think that's how silencing is talked about in the description, but I think there's a lot in that question to respond.
Yeah, I mean, the silence is often louder than noise in a lot of ways. I think a good example is one example is like in relation to the siren piece. Who hears the siren and who doesn't hear the siren, basically? Who has the warning that this bomb is coming? Who doesn't have that warning, in a sense? But silence can also be, it can be meditative as well. With silence, the lack of sound, there's an infinite amount of sounds that we can then produce ourselves or think about. So the first piece, the first room that we have with the light boxes and the trees, there's no sound. You have sound that kind of wafts in from the music and from the siren piece, but for the most part, it's just leaving you alone with your thoughts and alone with your own voices and how you're processing them. And that's also deliberate as well. It's important to have moments of reflective silence to allow for your own music to be made in your head.
And so there's a follow-up to that question, which is, and I'm guessing here it's also about kind of the relationship between sound and witness and witnessing. So what is the aesthetic of witnessing and what is its politics, particularly now?
Wow, that's a heavy question. I mean, I think of one, the takasims are a very immediate form of witnessing in a sense, and that it's an improvisation that's channeled through this instrument. And that's why the prompt, thinking about nature, and then having that process through the act of playing and improvising, that becomes a very, very specific type of witnessing. Then you also have the photographs as well that are witnesses to these trees at a moment in time. And it's a witness to, witness not only, that's what I think is works with the light box photographs of the trees, is that these trees themselves are witnesses, and then we're witnessing another layer on top of that as well. And then when you start thinking about like social media and how that comes into play, and that's been a big part of, the trees are all sized quite small, almost like you have to get quite close to them. And there is a relationship to social media as well, like thinking of that intimacy, that closeness, and how it affects us, how we're witnessing things on that level. But then when you zoom out or stand back or go into the real world, it becomes a different level, a different type of relationship. So yeah, there's multiple levels of that happening.
So we have two questions on process. One from Lena, who says, when you usually start developing a new piece, do you start with the concept or let the medium walk you through the concept? And when it comes to sound, how can a piece of sound inspire you to use other mediums? Thank you.
How can what be used for other mediums?
How can a piece of sound inspire you to use other mediums?
Oh, that's cool. I say process-wise, I think it's a mixture of both. Like for instance, with the photographs, I didn't have a concept or an idea in mind when I first started taking the photographs. It was just kind of more of an intuitive thing. And then later I figured out how I wanted to use them. But there are other works where I began conceptually, like with the siren piece with Alia, it began conceptually thinking about sirens and how to interpret them. It's a written score. The score that she used to interpret it is a written score that kind of thinks about the concept, talks about it, goes into like some of the ideas that I had in mind, and then she interprets it through her voice. But it began with the concept. And then I think like for a sound as a way, sound, how can sound be used with other mediums? I think Halim's approach, the study table for Halim is a good example of how that can be applied. Writing, visualizing, drawing, visualizing sound in different ways. There's a lot that you can do with that in a sense. But he also looked at sound very sculpturally. You can chisel sound, take certain frequencies out of sound, which can then also feed back into sculpture itself or in a different type of medium as well. So it's really, really cyclical in how it can work.
If I'm not mistaken, actually, the workshop that you gave in the Summer Academy was called Sculpting with Sound.
Sculpting, yes, exactly. Which comes out of his idea, like thinking about taking a sound. Like one of his earlier projects was thinking about electronic music, and he would record sounds that would have a negative impact on your body. Sounds of like machinery, sounds of like just sounds that are would negatively impact you. And then through these recordings, manipulating these recordings, running it through effects and things like this, create a sound that's turn that sound into something that's healing or something that's doesn't negatively affects you positively. Which I really love, the process that I really love thinking
about. So maybe kind of we will end with this question before I ask you kind of concluding reflective one. So also an anonymous attendee says, I visited the exhibition, and when I heard Halim's piece, I could also hear the siren piece playing in the background as if they were part of the same piece. Was that intentional, and why?
Yeah, yes, it was intentional. I like having that relationship Sound never exists in a complete vacuum. But also, I think that it's important to be able to have sounds mixed with each other. And especially that piece and the siren piece, I like the way in which they kind of interact with each other. And it was important also to, just to try and interject so that it's not just, I don't know. It's important to be able to mix them together in different ways. And I love that. The different types of accidents, ways in which the outside world comes into the gallery space and affects your experience. I think that's an important aspect of experiencing these installations and experiencing sound. It's sound that's quite unique to the city itself. You're not going to hear the same sounds if you're in a gallery in Beirut or in London or something like this, and these are sounds specific to Amman. And I like having that relationship.
Maybe kind of just to end on a note of what's next, and I think you can kind of take that in any direction you want. It could be what's next in terms of what are some lingering questions that are on your mind right now. What's next in terms of exhibitions. What's next in terms of
well, what's next? In terms of exhibitions, I'll be part of the Sharjah Biennial. I'll be going there. The opening in February. That's a piece that also deals with trees in different ways. And a very different approach to that. And then, I think what everybody's asking, like, we're in a very fragile time right now. What's next for us? And where we're gonna go. I definitely want to go back to the south of Lebanon is still occupied, still not accessible. But once it gets made accessible, I definitely want to go and document, continue the documentation, particularly of the trees that are damaged, but also the trees that haven't been damaged. So it's testaments to their kind of survival as well. There's a lot of questions, more questions than answers, I guess, right now.
I think that applies to all of us. Inshallah, we see days which I think see a lot of people returning and freedom.
I hope so.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Khaled.
Appreciate your time, and it was kind of lovely having you, and we hope to see you soon in Amman in person. And maybe we can catch you, I think, one last time before the exhibition comes down. Thank you so much to everyone who's attended. For people who are in Amman and haven't come to see the exhibition, please do. We gave you quite a breakdown today, but it's definitely, I think, a more experiencing it is different. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Khaled.